Hey everyone, welcome to the Troy Christian High School Chapel Podcast. At the end of this episode, please take a moment to subscribe to our Chapel YouTube channel and follow our Chapel Instagram account. Those two places will be the easiest way to check out what's coming up, as well as find some bonus content from our speakers and worship team. Most importantly, I hope the following message challenges and encourages you to grow in your relationship with God as you learn to love God and love others better. Enjoy. All right, Scott, back in the host chair with Tommy Royce. How are you doing?
I'm good.
You good? You did a great job hosting last week. I think that went really well.
Thank you.
And I listened back to it. That was solid content. I really enjoyed it. I heard back from a few people just how like that conversation about leadership and what we're doing here being helpful to them. So that was good. So thanks for hosting last week.
No problem. Yeah, I think we definitely gave some insight on kind of our values and what is driving our decision making in a lot of what we do, and that's student leadership as being a top priority. And we're also coming back from the last chapel. Maya Barnishan spoke, and she was excellent.
She was.
Student, and she's a senior for those who don't know, and just her delivery and presentation was very good in and of itself, but just the spiritual maturity and spiritual leadership that took place from her sharing her heart on what God's been teaching her this year, that was incredible.
Yeah, her take on just the role of desperation was fresh. It's something, just the idea that like God desires this attitude, this position of desperation from us, that we want and need our relationship with God. And that's the very thing, that desperation is the very thing that Satan is like exploiting in our life. Was spot on and really, really helpful perspective with it. So really good. If you haven't listened to that, make sure you catch that on either on the podcast here or on YouTube, and you will not regret it. I promise you. We are coming up to the end of our first semester here, which feels really, really good.
Christmas break
is like a day and a half away from us right now. So I'm pumped. It does feel like an accomplishment to get to this point, through the year with all of everything that's been going on, with minimal interruption.
Yeah.
So that has been encouraging to get to this place.
Yeah. I would say with 2020 and all that it's brought, that just getting normal things done feels like a major accomplishment compared to just it being what's expected.
That's absolutely accurate. Absolutely accurate. So we're getting ready to go into Christmas break. We've got a couple weeks off. This is your first Christmas as a married man, right?
It's true.
So what's the plans? How are you and Kayla, how are you going to go about this Christmas season? And it's a little weird too, because it's 2020 still, but.
Yeah, we are a little more on the stay home, social distance kind of side of the spectrum when it comes to responding to this. For those who don't know, my mom has had like chronic health issues most of my life, and so she's pretty high risk, so we're a little maybe extra careful compared to some others. So we are still figuring out what our game plan is for who we're visiting and what we're doing and not doing this year, but I'd say that I might be turning the corner on what Christmas means for me now, because I have a history of being a little bit of a Scrooge or a Grinch, most of my life. And I think part of that is how my Christmases in the past have been handled. This is kind of like, I'm not trying to criticize my family or anything, but I don't know how not, but like
we're getting into some
I know you're
some counseling I know, here. I feel like this is where this is going. Okay.
But
let me get my notebook out.
Yeah. So one, I'm an only child, so my Christmases have been pretty small, and I've only got like 3 cousins that live in Ohio, so like things are pretty small, uneventful usually. But my average Christmas growing up meant going to my like aunt's house, and then so I would see my cousins there, but then they'd also invite my cousins, aunts and uncles, and cousins who are not my cousins or aunts and uncles, and I'd be spending a day in a house with all these people I don't know and only see like once a year.
Sure.
And so honestly, Christmas was not. I prefer the things leading up to Christmas compared to Christmas growing up.
Gotcha.
But now I've got, a new family,
Yeah.
my wife and I.
Yeah.
We've got we can kind of make our own decisions.
That's
and decide how are we going to celebrate as a new family.
Yeah.
And so I've got a little more positivity with Christmas now because of the new opportunities for what we can do and what we'll choose to do.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you guys like decorate the house and all that good stuff?
Yeah. I have I had never done like Christmas lights before and things like that, and so she's like, let's decorate, let's celebrate, and I'm like, okay.
Kayla is just bringing out all the good in Tommy.
It's true.
It's wild.
And so
he's a new man.
We've got just decorations in the house mostly, and gifts under the tree ready,
Wow, look at you guys.
So
good stuff, man. Good stuff. We just moved, so we're like kind of enjoying this Christmas season in a new house for us, and that's been like a lot of fun just to kind of figure those things out. And Eli, our son Eli, just loves. I mean, he just gets so excited about this time of year. So it's always good. But it tends to be this way for a lot of people. It's also can be a very stressful season. There tends to be so much going on. There's a lot of pressure. I think, Tim mentioned this a while ago, just the Thanksgiving, he enjoys Thanksgiving better because of the lack of pressure on the gift giving that comes with Christmas, so there's like this weird, almost dichotomy that's happening in this Christmas season between like, it's supposed to be this time of peace and slowing down, and yet at the same time, there's this like pressure and rush and push for all of these things going on. So I don't know if that's been your experience too. With
I think
Christmas.
That's part of why I've got that. I've not embraced Christmas fully yet. Is I read the story, the biblical story of why we're celebrating, and then I look up in the world and I just see long lines to buy things and commercials and materialism and pressure and all these things. I'm like, is this? I don't know. I'm just a little skeptical. I'm turning the corner a little bit, but I've still got a little bit of that in me that's like, is this really what it's all about? Is this the greatest thing we can do here? I don't know.
Is this the best way to celebrate this season? Is this like that? I think that's the kind of the question at the heart of it. And there's a part of it is that there's, in all of that rush and pressure and all that stuff, there is like, I think a lot of people find a lot of fun and enjoyment with being with people. But it is kind of that very almost confusing time because of all that's going on at the same time. So how do we enter into this season and try to like fully capture that idea of awaiting this gift of the Christ to come, right? What is it? What are some of the things as believers, as Christians, that we can do to kind of come into that season and actually experience peace and joy that was promised with the Christ?
Well, I think it looks different for everybody, but I can share on one thing that's helped me out. I have more enjoyed Christmas when I see it in the context of the Advent season, as opposed to just like the Christmas season, the days leading up to Christmas and Christmas Eve and Christmas Day kind of being the only celebratory aspects there. Advent is part of the church calendar,
right?
Along with, Christmas time and Lent and Pentecost and all these different things that I have kind of become a student of over the past few years, And just learning about this has helped me like love the holidays more, not just Christmas, but all the holidays, bringing some sort of meaning and kind of like a spirituality to it all. One thing about me that I think people might not know is that, if you see me at church or at chapel, you'll probably see me with, my hands raised, singing a contemporary worship song. But if you took me to your grandma's church and we bring out the hymnals, I'll feel just at home and just as happy about that, even though it's not in my background. And even though it's not what chapel looks like at all, there's a part of me that really loves that style, really loves the history and the meaning of that approach, and sees it as very valuable. I think there's kind of a false dichotomy between, are you for modern worship or are you traditional and wanting hymnals and all that kind of things?
Yeah, so much so that churches will literally like offer a split, like we're going to try to appease both, rather like, and I get that, I understand that process, because people I think live in that kind of world, rather than trying to grow an appreciation for both by mixing. But I think it's difficult. I don't know that there's a win either way with that, on how you do it. But I am with you on that. I love the liturgical approach. I don't know that I could like sit in that all year round, but I love it as a part of how I experience my faith with that.
Yeah, here's what I've thought about for myself is growing up, as a teenager, in a Christian environment, going to youth group and chapel and whatnot. I loved the energy and the excitement that came with like, modern worship songs and all that we did in kind of youth group and chapel. But as I've gotten older, the more I've liked the more slowed down approach of the traditional liturgical side of worship. And here's why I think growing up, you as a teenager, especially, you go to class, you still live with your parents, you do what you're told. Life's got kind of a mundane rhythm and routine to it. And anything that kind of throws in a bit of excitement and throws you out of that routine is engaging. Adult life, on the other hand, feels more out of sorts and chaotic, and you don't know what bill is going to show up that you didn't think, you didn't anticipate, or you didn't know what problem is going to come up. And life seems more kind of wild in and of itself. And so anything that brings routine and rhythm and structure and order to it actually is more engaging now.
Yeah. It's almost like it is like a release from all of that other kind of stuff. There's some stability there that we're looking for.
Right. It's like in the midst of a week where I don't know what's going to happen, I could at least have an hour of the week where I do, and that brings peace.
Yeah. So what does Advent look like for you then? That's kind of one of your ways of engaging in this season. What does that look like for you?
So for me, Advent, so my background is not in any sort of kind of more traditional liturgical approach to church, and so I'm still very much a student of this mindset. Grew up in a mega church, we sang Hillsong every week. It's not my background. And so I've been learning, and I'm still definitely don't feel like I'm enough of a master to give you like a full perfect explanation. But what it's meant for me, at least, is I have read about how Advent is meant to be a season that cultivates desperation and longing and anticipation. And it's kind of supposed to mirror how the world was longing for and in anticipation of the arrival of the Messiah, and that Christmas kind of delivers what that anticipation is longing for. And so in the same way that it's kind of like a way to spiritually prepare yourself for Christmas so that when it arrives, it hits home in a way that is saying what I'm longing for is the arrival of Christ. And even though Christ already has arrived and we live every day with his presence within us, there is still a sense of I can build up anticipation. I can build up longing within myself so that whenever Christ does show up in my life more clearly or more pronounced, he's meeting a longing that exists instead of it coming as kind of like a random just a random arrival.
It actually mirrors how Lent prepares us for that Easter season in the same way that the Advent is preparing us, if we choose to, for Christmas.
Yeah.
And so there's some process. And I know it's funny, we were talking earlier, Tim was mentioning how what he knows about Advent is that like the chocolate calendar thing, which is funny because you and I are like, we know nothing about the chocolate calendar. Sounds delicious though.
Yeah.
Sounds delicious. But, and then like, I know for some, if your church celebrates it, it's like, well, Advent is that we like light these 4 candles in the 4 Sundays leading up to Christmas, and we maybe do like a scripture reading. But that's like the extent of how they experience Advent. And so are there things that you're doing outside of like the church service or outside of, I'm assuming you don't do the chocolate calendar.
Yeah, don't do the chocolate calendar.
Right.
Maybe next year.
Maybe now.
Good.
Apparently we're missing out.
Yeah. But so for me, I let my daily Bible reading plan be determined by the church calendar. I've got a Book of Common Prayer, which you can also access online as well. I'm still actually working on how to use it more comprehensively, but it at least has the kind of like this assigned reading plan that leads you through kind of the major parts of the Bible in a couple years span, and the readings always have some sort of attachment to what season you're in. And so being on a reading plan that incorporates the church calendar for me has been a way to like engage in Advent. Another thing that my wife and I are doing together is we have an Advent devotional, and the one we have is called Honest Advent by Scott Erickson, and we have spent just about every day, finding some time to just pause and read the devotional together, and every entry is tackles some sort of topic within Advent or within the season that leads up to Christmas. And so there have been entries on what does it mean that Jesus became human. There's been entries on the significance that God blessed Mary with her pregnancy. There's all sorts of kind of themes within the Christmas story that have been incorporated in this devotional. And so for me, part of how I kind of incorporate myself into the Advent season is through the scripture readings and then also through devotionals. And I try to find devotionals that fit the different seasons throughout the year. Like I've got a Lent devotional I like to use as well when that time comes. And so those are just some practices for me that help make Advent and Christmas time more meaningful.
Yeah, no, that's super helpful. There's a lot of resources out there to kind of help navigate you through this season. Advent initially started it's like in the 5th, 6th centuries as actually preparation for the Feast of Epiphany. So it's like when you talk about like the 12 days of Christmas and like the season after the 25th that we celebrate, right? At the Feast of Epiphany, there were baptisms of new believers at that time. So there really was like a time of like preparing for that growth and that celebration to take place. And what that involved, much like Lent, was a time of fasting. It was prayer. It was it was asking for forgiveness, and it was over the years that it started to develop actually into more of the idea of like not just this growth that was taking place in the church, but that we were looking forward to the coming of Christ, his first coming, the birth, but then also looking forward in that season to his second coming. And so what do you do? What do you do when you think about and anticipate that God is coming back? Right? You start to say, like, what does it look like what does my relationship with God look like right now?
Yeah.
Right. And that's when that's why we start to take a look at fasting and asking for forgiveness and those kinds of things. But it's because it is a season of like, oh yeah, no, Christ wasn't just born, right? That like where we're heading is to be reunited with God, is to be reunited with Christ. This season of Advent is a season to remind us that we still want to pursue a right relationship with God. What does that look like? And so over the weeks leading up to Christmas, it's very easy to get wrapped up into like this celebratory season of like, oh yeah, Jesus was born. But it's also a reminder that Jesus didn't just come, but he's coming.
Yeah.
And what do we do in preparation, not just for like the second coming of Christ, but just what do we do in preparation to be in relationship with God that Christ has allowed us to be into? And so that's what I love about that Advent mentality. Like Lent, it can help us strip away all of this excess stuff and really get to the heart of we have the opportunity to be in relationship with God.
Yeah. I think one thing I love about Advent that I think just distinguishes it from Lent is in Lent leading up to Easter, we kind of more so press into our suffering and our sorrow, right, and like kind of pressing into our equivalent experiences of Christ's crucifixion so that life can burst forth in the midst of death. Advent is more anticipatory, it's more hope driven, it's more of, okay, God has promised that he will arrive on earth, and the same way that the wise men, they were like, yes, he's finally here, he's arrived in the way he's promised. And that same promise of Christ's arrival can take place in our lives, in our situations, where we have situations that seem hopeless, situations that seem like God is not present within them. And Advent creates that anticipation and that reminder of that there is reason to have hope.
Yeah.
There is reason to expect Christ to show up. There is reason to anticipate that God will intervene and do something. And that's what kind of Advent cultivates within us when we participate in it.
Yeah, and I one of the things that I love, I think particularly about the season we're in right now, with just everything going on in the world, is how unexpectedly God showed up. That people had expectations of what that was going to look like, and that's not how God came. And I think when you look at from, being born in a stable to shepherds who were unworthy to be in the temple, being like the first guest of the new Messiah in God's presence. All of those things are things that like, okay, we are expecting God to move in certain ways. And then a lot of times, I think that's what, part of the Christmas story reveals, is a lot of times God's not going to show up in the way we expect. So what do? We just wait in anticipation to see how God is going to show up.
Exactly.
And we try to prepare ourselves to be ready to see that and to experience it. And so hopefully this season, as we go into celebrating Christmas, as we finish up this Advent season, hopefully we can find space in our time, or in our calendars, in our schedules, in our homes, just to sit and look at like just being thankful for God showing up, but also being anticipatory of how are you going to show up now in our lives? How are you going to show up in this whole situation that we see ourselves in now? We still are waiting in anticipation for God to show up and reveal himself. And sometimes that means stripping back our expectations of what that's going to look like, and just say, God, I'm just ready for however you're going to show up. So just let us see it.
It's good. Yes. We should remind ourselves to slow down.
That's right.
In the midst of the hustle and bustle this season.
That's right. Well, Tommy, thanks. And I hope you enjoy your first Christmas as a married couple.
Thank you.
That is an exciting time to build new traditions, and hopefully for all of you who are tuning in with us, we wish you a Merry Christmas and enjoy the Advent season. Spend time just in reflection and prayer this season. I think that's been one of the gifts of 2020, hopefully, and all of the mess that's been going on is it's forced some of us to take those pauses on things, and that's been good and healthy, and just continue to look for how God is going to show up in and around you. So thanks for joining in. We will be back in January with podcasts, so look for those in a few weeks, and thanks for tuning in, and have a Merry Christmas.